are treacherous, is no other word for it.
We said to ourselves, really, we're just looking for heads in the water here.
Being asked to go down to those hellish awful gullies and saying, corpse, do you recognise that?
I've been riding on that beach for 15, 16 years. It's my favourite ride, really. Monty is the first horse I've ever owned, so I've got a very deep affection for him.
Danger Man was a young horse with a great future in front of him. We went down on the beach for half an hour's gallop because the going's so good and it's a marvellous sensation.
Rowena Barthorpe and Diana Cumberledge, played here by actresses, were enjoying the miles of sand off Jersey at low tide. They didn't intend to visit Seymour Tower that day.
You could see Seymour Tower, which is several miles away. Conditions were not too bad, but we suddenly found ourselves completely enveloped in this amazingly thick, dense fog. We simply couldn't see anything.
So thick. I've never known anything like it. You couldn't even see the horse's ears. You couldn't see the ground. We couldn't see each other. We decided we had to ride with our knees touching or we'd have lost each other.
It was just white, white, white. It was very, very spooky.
It wasn't long before they were completely lost.
We suddenly found ourselves in amongst rocks and gullies full of stones and seaweed, and the shingle gets much thicker and heavier, where we shouldn't have been at all.
They didn't realise they were walking round in circles. The horses were in constant danger of losing their footing.
If one of them had strained a tendon or even broken a leg, which is quite possible if they had tripped badly, we would have been even in a worse predicament. Would we have left the poor horse? I was extremely concerned. I didn't want to let Diana realise quite how concerned I was. She doesn't know that beach like I do, and so I was trying to be brave about it as best I could. But underneath, I was choking on the panic.
Raymond Barthorpe, played here by an actor, knew a 40-foot tide was expected that night and went to look for his wife and her friend.
There was her Land Rover and trailer, empty. I started to get a bit anxious, and so I walked up onto the sea wall, nothing, and it was then that the fog was starting to come in from the sea, and the tide was coming in.
The rising tide had already cut them off from the shore. Rowena and Diana were wading further out to sea when, with just minutes to spare, they came across Seymour Tower.
It just loomed up out of the fog. We were literally underneath it. The tide was rising very fast. We hadn't been able to get the horses up. We really had to face the fact that we might have had to have just left them to their fate, I'm ashamed to say.
You'd never think a horse would get up there. If you show any panic or fear, the horse will pick it up instantly.
The horses must have sensed our urgency. They wouldn't have gone up those steps if they hadn't sensed the urgency. Monty was more reluctant. The steps are very steep and very rutted.
Come on, Monty, come on!
Then we saw how quickly the tide was rising up the tower. I realised we were in a very serious position. We weren't sure whether we were going to be washed off at the tower. I had a friend there and 2 precious horses, and there's nothing I could do about it.
Let's take this back and keep them nice and warm. Okay.
You were very worried that they'd catch cold, so first thing we did was to take off their saddle cloths and put them back over their kidneys, because that's the most sensitive part of the horse. Danger Man sheltered Monty, knowing that Monty was more fragile, I think. He acted as a wingard. I mean, they were marvellous together. We kept peering over the edge to see how far down the sea was. Every now and then, when the fog lifted a bit, you could see. But we didn't know how far it was going to come up. This was the worst thing.
They were stranded with absolutely no way of raising the alarm.
I was pinning my hopes on the fact they might have ridden back overland. I went home, no sign of them. Oh, one had to assume at that stage that they had disappeared into the Atlantic. That's when I pressed the alarm bells.
The Jersey Fire Service rescue boat was called out, and Graham Mercier, one of the island's honorary policemen, began coordinating the search.
Yeah, now what we would like you to do, we'd like you to launch, search the bay.
I rated their chances as very, very slim. Slimmer than slim, in actual fact.
They headed out to sea, but the fog and rocky gullies made the search dangerous. The inshore lifeboat was launched too.
You search wherever possible in a grid sort of pattern. You go out so far, we'd stop, cut the engines, call. Anybody there can hear anything.
Nothing heard.
After an hour, their meticulous search was rewarded.
Fire service got in touch with us on the radio. And they were the first ones to find Rowena and Diana on Seymour Tower.
The boats had to manoeuvre carefully between the rocks to avoid being holed.
It was just wonderful when they arrived. It really was a magic moment.
But it was far too rough to bring the boat in and to get off. We came up to the steps area. I went over the side into the water, climbed up onto the rocks. There was two very relieved women that were rather wet and not very happy. Well, they were happy once they saw me.
Yes, yes, yes.
And you have horses?
2 horses, yes.
But you're all right.
It was nice to know that they were safe. But that was only the beginning. The next of it, you had to get the horses off.
No way I'm leaving.
I'll get on the radio, see what ideas I've got from shore.
The second phase of the rescue was going to be far from simple. The horses would almost certainly fall to their deaths if they tried to get them back down the steps. And the fog and risk of a fatal panic ruled out the chance of winching them off by helicopter. At low tide, friends and relatives arrived and temporarily lifted their spirits.
We were extremely relieved, and there was Raymond, and there was the vet, and obviously things were going to be right, and we were elated.
I was very, very frightened. And at one point I scratched a message on the wall with my whip. I scratched, Diana and Rowena, so sorry. God save us. Love you all. I really did think that the end had come, or could come actually at that moment. It was a bad moment. I wanted to write that message just so that if we had drowned, someone would have known that we'd been there.
By morning, their plight had hit the headlines.
Seymour Tower saved the riding party from almost certain drowning. They scrambled to the...
It's amazing where animals get to. I've never had one on a tower. I've had them down cliffs. I've had them in water troughs, but I've never had them on top of a tower. My first thoughts were, how do we get them off? This was going to be a major problem. The horse used its head to nod to help it up the steps. When you come down very steep steps, and especially these particular steps that were very, very steep, the centre of gravity is on the wrong side of the forelegs. The back end would flip over, fall down, and it would break its back or its neck. At some point, I probably would have had to say, I think the time has come that we're not going to be able to hold them on this tower, and I'll have to shoot them. And that has to be handled with great care and understanding, because they are the children to the owners.
The horses were perfectly healthy, and it would have seemed sort of waste to have put them down. We had to get them off that tide. It was do or die, I'm afraid.
They finally came up with the ingenious idea of building a ramp from sand and gravel to lead the horses down. But they'd missed their chance. The next high tide was due. There wasn't time to organise enough diggers and tractors to do the job in daylight. They prepared themselves for another cold night on the tower.
Hay was brought out on a tractor and trailer, a chain of people passing the hay up to build a windbreak for the horses. I must confess they were rather more interested in eating the hay.
They were soon cut off again, but volunteers from Jersey's building industry made sure they were ready to help at the next low water around midnight.
It was the most wonderful sight, this armada of diggers arriving, the light shining across the sand and the noise of the cat tracks. It was the most wonderful, welcoming sight. And they swung into action in the most amazing speed. I think they moved something like 900 tons of sand and shingle in an hour and a half.
But the volunteers had to beat the next deadline when the tide would again cut off the tower and they'd have to retreat.
It was almost like a ballet. One dropped and smoothed the ramp, and the other one was putting another pile of stone and another pile of gravel. It really was sort of poetry in motion. Even then, it was still starting to get a bit touch and go. The low water came, and we were all looking and thinking, shortly, we're only about halfway up now. We've only got about another hour to do this, plus get the horses off. I was standing on the parapet of the tower, looking sort of to the shore, and I saw this little light, and there was this lady with this horse, a little pony, So I went up to her and said to her, you know, what on earth do you want to bring a horse down in these conditions? She said, well, I heard that you're building a ramp to get the horses off if it's possible, and I thought that if I brought my little pony down and put it halfway up the ramp, then the other two horses on the tower might see the pony and it would encourage them to come down. And I thought, what a sweet idea, you know, I thought, what a fantastic idea.
The ramp was finally finished. Now it was all down to the pony to try and tempt Danger Man and Monty to safety.
We started to lead with Danger Man. We thought as he'd gone up first, he'd be brave and go down first. But he balked, actually, at one of the lights. And then this little grey horse whinnied. It was such a wonderful, wonderful sound. And Monty just walked by and walked down the ramp first, and Danger Man followed. It was just wonderful, that moment. The way the island community came together, it was very, very moving experience, how everybody pulled together to get those horses down.
The horses' rescue ended a 33-hour ordeal, which had so nearly cost the lives of Diana and Rowena too.
The next morning I went out again, and that ramp had gone completely, and all the hay had been swept off. The tower had obviously been completely washed over. If Seymour Tower wasn't there, we certainly would have drowned.
They're the luckiest people around. Very lucky to be alive.
I've never been on the beach except on a brilliant, clear, sunny day since then. I don't suppose I ever will do.
So when the tide comes in, local saying, it's like a galloping horse coming in.